This episode is brought to you by Third Love. With or without Valentine's Day, it's important to celebrate all the special people in your life, including yourself. So treat them and yourself to a little something from Third Love. Their luxurious bras, underwear, and ultra-soft sleepwear hug better, support longer, and love you right back, which make them perfect to show your appreciation and for a little me time. Upgrade to pieces that love your body as much as you do. And right now, get 20% off your first order at thirdlove.com/pod.
Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor and subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcasts, and also subscribe on YouTube at Empire Media. That's AMPIRE. It would be much appreciated. Today, I'm joined by ESPN's Jeff Legwold, who discusses his top 100 draft ranking list, which is currently up on ESPN.com. It's Legwold's ranking based on his watching the film of these players, scouting players, talking to scouts, coaches, GMs. Folks, they come to him for information about these players during the draft, so pay attention to what Jeff has to say. Leggy's been doing this a long time, folks. You can follow Jeff on Twitter at Jeff_Legwold, and you can read my work on ESPN.com. We'll have all sorts of draft content on ESPN.com this week, and we'll have instant analysis after every team's pick during the draft. I will have a podcast Wednesday and another one after Washington's pick on Thursday night, and then another on Sunday, wrapping up the draft. I talked to Jeff about the work he puts into this process. He's not just some sports writer taking a stab at a ranking. He approaches it like a scout. Listen to what he does during games, what he does on the road, the detailed things he looks for, and then we dive into some possible picks for Washington. Kyle Hamilton, Drake London, Chris Olave, some of the offensive tackles, Evan Neal, Ika Mekwonu, and Charles Cross. If a premium tackle falls to 11, it's going to be hard for them to ignore, real hard. There are also definitely offensive linemen they like in the middle rounds, so it's not a necessity to grab one here. But I'll be honest, let's say Mekwonu or Neal somehow was there at 11, not expecting it, but I think there's going to be a guy sitting there at 11. People are going to say, oh, I didn't see that happening. But if it's one of those guys, it's a home run pick. With Cross, I think it would be slightly less than those guys, but I do think they think Cross will go in the top 10 as well. And yes, he would be tempting for them at 11. They really do like Drake London, and I know they like Chris Olave as well. The interesting one will be Alabama receiver Jameson Williams. I know his knee situation will concern some teams, but if they somehow, if Washington and other teams find out that Williams is ahead of schedule, legitimately so, then if he's there for Washington 11, watch out. I do believe he'd be in play. He'd have to be. Of course, if he's ahead of schedule, I don't think he's going to be there at 11. If you didn't hear Logan Paulson discuss Williams, go back and listen to the draft podcast I did with Logan last week. I'll be making my pick, by the way, I'll be making my pick for our NFL Nation mock draft special. That's Tuesday night. I think it's at 8 o'clock. I like my pick. However, my confidence level, if they make the same pick, given the scenario that developed, is at best a medium. I know they have confidence in receivers Curtis Samuel. Scott Turner told me once that he's one of the smartest players he's ever coached. He just needs to stay healthy, and he can make a big difference in this offense if he does. But is he a strong number two? I'm not sure anybody would say that. So that's why the receiver's in play. And there are definitely some receivers they take at 11, knowing what he could do for this offense. It would allow them to use 4 wideouts. It would create a different subset of plays they could use. Imagine them with 4 wideouts and Logan Thomas, 4 wideouts and J.D. McKissick. It's how you create mismatches. You could go with 3 receivers, 3 quality receivers. Let's say you have receiver from this draft at 11, plus Curtis Samuel, plus Terry McLaurin. Then you throw J.D. McKissick and Antonio Gibson in the backfield. How do teams defend that? Or you have those 3 receivers plus McKissick or Gibson in the backfield, and then Logan Thomas on the field. That's the way you create a much better offense for yourselves. The offensive line is a definite possibility too, and there are some guys I think would really be really good for them to get there. They have 4 starters, and again, they'd have to fall. They have 4 starters up front, have to settle on a right guard. Again, if a tackle fell, they can take that guy, slide Sam Cosmi inside, and have one hell of a right side for several years. There are some guards and tackles after the first round who could probably step in and start as well in their eyes. So it's not a necessity to grab one there, but I do think it's something they're going to try and address. I also asked Jeff if there's a player he thinks could tempt another team to trade up to 11 if they're sitting there. Not one of the quarterbacks, as another player. Is there another one? Maybe one of the defensive ends, maybe even Hamilton, knowing for Washington, if you add more picks, you can still pick up a safety they like after the first, maybe a Lewis Seen, Jaquan Brisker. Those guys are possibilities, Daxton Hill, among others. But the value of this draft will be rounds 2 through 4. So the more picks they can get there, the better off they'll be. Again, they'd look at linebacker up to the first round as well. Again, those picks have to hit. Anyway, that's it from me. I'll be back after this break with ESPN's Jeff Legwold talking about his top 100 prospects list, where he ranks some Washington targets like Hamilton, London, Olave, and Williams, and the O-lineman.
This is an ad for Roundup for Lawns. It kills weeds down to the root without harming your lawn. It works on crabgrass, dandelions, clover. It works on weeds with names you can't even pronounce. It's Roundup for Lawns. When used as directed, always read and follow pesticide label directions.
Welcome back. Now here's my conversation with ESPN's Jeff Legwold. All right, Leggy, the most exhaustive draft story of the offseason is always your top 100. And I want to get into in a minute about some of the rankings, the way you had it, et cetera. But I also want to start off by having you tell people what you put into this, because it is because people are going to see, like you have, for people who know, there's Jeff Legwold's top 100. It's on ESPN site right now. You rank the players. It's not a mock, it's a ranking. And there's a paragraph for each guy. But those paragraphs for each guy probably like equates to hours and hours of conversations and work. So in a nutshell, like how many people are you talking to? How many hours of film are you watching to do this, to get this done?
Well, John, I sort of, we all come into this job from a certain direction. And my direction sort of was scouts at first. I covered the combine before I covered an NFL game. I interviewed scouts before I interviewed a GM in my career. 36 years ago, I was learning I was covering college football and high school stuff, but so scouts were my entry point. And when I was in newspapers, I was writing the draft before a lot of people. Mel obviously was doing his guide, but there weren't many guys in newspapers doing the draft a lot. And I couldn't get my editors to run it, but I always just did it. So through the season, even covering the Broncos, if they make a road trip and I go to the city on the Saturday, I often will sit with a scout who's in that area who I know, or I'll go to a Division II game, to see a player I might be interested in. But I do that through the season. I kind of, like the teams do, you get your initial list and you work off that. And scouts I know will help me. They'll say, here are 10 guys I think you should keep an eye on this year, whatever. And by the time I talk to everybody, I got a pretty big list. And I just keep cranking on that all year. And then after the season ends, whether the team I cover goes to the playoffs or the Super Bowl or whatever, if they miss the playoffs, then I really get deeper into it. But I try to do a little each day, even during the fall. And then when I get to the January, February, then I really get going. But, it's game video, it's interviews with, scouts, GMs. If I talk to a coach about something, I'll throw a couple draft questions in at the end. Hey, have you seen so-and-so? And often coaches don't get involved until their season's over too much. So most of the fall is scouts and personnel guys and all of that. And then the coaches get more involved in January. So yeah, and the combine, I transcribe roughly, whether it be 1 minute of an interview or 20, I probably had 200 people I had spoken to at the combine in some fashion, either one question or 10. But it's just that, I've always done it. Not every outlet I've worked for 3 decades ago ran it, because nobody ran much draft stuff back then. I think me, Bob McGinn, maybe in Milwaukee, Rick Gosselin in Dallas, we were kind of that early wave of draft. Mort, when Mort worked in Atlanta, he would write a little draft stuff from time to time. So that was kind of that early wave of draft in daily newspapers, and then to see what it is now is pretty funny. But
but little things like, and we were talking, I think a week or so ago, about some of the stuff you do, what you look for. You were saying that sometimes you watch a quarterback on a film just to watch his eyes.
That's one of the, I'm a one-man band, so I don't have a staff, to break down every guy. So I've had to develop sort of certain ways to look at certain positions. I've been very fortunate. Some of the best scouts ever have helped me along the way learn how to look at things. And I do a thing with quarterbacks. I sort of have a little multiplier I personally use. I call them stress downs. Third down means more, red zone means more. I'm not interested much in the wide open receiver type of things that you get a lot of in college football. They scheme guys open and they're throwing to wide open, big throwing windows. So I've had to develop little things where I can separate players on things that will matter in the NFL, and keeping your eyes up and on what's developing in front of you down the field rather than the rush. The guys who peek at the rush too much, too often, or get skittish and leave the pocket and those type of things, those guys don't transfer as well to the NFL, and it doesn't matter how great their arm is. So I always say arm strength is like number 9 on the list of things you're going to need to be a great NFL quarterback.
How often do teams ask what you think about a guy?
It's more, people I know. I get texts all the time. What do you think of so-and-so? Or where do you have him? Sometimes even on draft day, I've had teams on the clock sort of ping me once in a while about, do you know this, or do you have this little item? Things like that. And I have one rule: everybody I know knows it. And because I believe in being honest with people, I will tell everybody who asks me what I have on a player, or what I think of a player, or what my interactions were with that player. But I won't tell one team what another team is doing or who they like. I just think that's up to them to figure out. That's not my deal.
So let's get to the rankings now. There's a lot of talk about this draft and how different people will look at not just the top 10, but probably the top 40 or 50.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
So how hard was it to get a top 10? You had Evan Neal first, and another guy that's of interest here is Kyle Hamilton. I don't know that would take him, but he's a guy of interest. You have it number 3. So how hard was it to get that top 10 this year?
Well, you have two things happening, John. There's not a consensus quarterback at the top of the board. That always messes everything up. And by messes everything up, I mean, it sort of gives people the freedom to rank players however they want. If there's not a quarterback leading the way, or, 2 quarterbacks, last year quarterbacks, go 1, 2, 3. And I doubt very seriously any team had those quarterbacks at 1, 2, and 3 on their boards.
Right.
But they all knew they would be drafted there. And that's the big difference that I think sometimes folks don't realize. Teams pick players above, just like they pick them below where they have them graded, they often pick them above where they have them graded too. So this year, so there's no QB at the top. So that changes the dynamic. And, not even no consensus 2 quarterbacks in the top 10. So that changes everything at the top of the board. And then this is one of the biggest draft classes in terms of graded players I can ever remember. I think the COVID seasons, people staying in school because they got that extra COVID year almost like free. The guys could come back for a 5th and 6th year who wouldn't have in previous years. So this is a very big draft class in terms of graded players. There's a lot of 25-year-olds on the board. there's a lot of guys who played 45 or more games, more than I can ever remember. This is like an old school draft, when you couldn't turn pro almost. Right. And I mean, Kobe Bryant, Cincinnati corner, he is the first 60-game player I can ever remember evaluating. Played 63 games. And just as a context, when Phillip Rivers came out, he had 51 starts, and that was a record for a drafted player at that time. And here's Kobe Bryant that many years later. He has 63 game career. I can't ever remember that. So those are the two things that are most unique about this draft. And we probably won't see as many graded players like this draft in a very long time. That's why the second, third, fourth, fifth rounds of this draft are just better than most years. Teams are going to be pulling guys off the board in day 3 where they have day 2 grades on them because there were so many guys with day 2 grades.
And I was going to ask you that too, because with Washington, they have picks in the first and second round, no picks in the third and the fifth. And I know that they would like to add picks in those rounds because they know that's where the value is. So how important, and the hard part though, Leggy, is they're picking 11th. Who might fall to 11 that would cause a team to move up in a trade?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, John. I always say that the bluest of the blue chip players, there's routinely 8 or 9 or 10 on the board, get whatever year you're talking about. And I'm talking the bluest of the blue. Right. And that routinely, and if you're at 10, 11, 12, you can get one of those players, but what you need to happen is the quarterback run. The Washington needs, if they want one of those blue chip guys they really, really love to come down to 11, they need somebody to come get 1 or 2 of the quarterbacks above them.
Right.
And I think that's what happens. That's when you get the really good players at 15 and 16. That you need somebody to jump up and get one of those skill players who may not be graded there for real.
Well, and that's what I'm wondering, who might fall to 11 that would prompt, because I know one area that this is a good edge rushing class.
Oh, edge rushers in every round who will come in and contribute.
And I don't think they would take an edge rusher 11, not with Sweat and Young there, because while they may like a guy, they're going to have other areas they would like to address with the old best player available at area of need. So would one of those ends, do you think, and I don't like the quarterbacks as you have. I think Malik is your first quarterback at 29.
Yeah,
so that
I'm always lower, and I take heat for that all the time. But that's where they're really graded.
Right. And so it's hard to imagine there's going to be a quarterback they might trade up for, but could one of those ends tempt somebody, or could maybe one of the corners tempt somebody to move up?
I think somebody's going to jump at one of the quarterbacks. I really do. I never believe. Where do
you think is the sweet spot for that? You think they're getting to top 10?
Yeah, 6 or 9, I think, are the spots. I think in the big picture, I think a lot of teams out there who want quarterbacks wonder what the Steelers will do, because the Steelers don't often trade in the first round. I covered them. My last year on the Steelers was 1993, and they're still drafting the same profile of player because they've had so much consistency and on that side of their organization. Very few coaches, very few GMs, very little turnover. So their draft profile is the same largely, all these years, and they don't often move around in the first round. They're like the Ravens. They're patient and they wait for the good players to come down because they know impatience rules the day for a lot of teams. So there'll be teams jumping up there. So I always believe if you're at 11 through 15, you're going to get a top 10 player. You're going to have a shot at a top 10 player when your pick rolls around.
Sure. But if you want to trade back, let's say Washington wants to trade back from 11 to, let's say they want to trade back. Is there another position that somebody would move up for? Would Jermaine, if Johnson falls out of the top 10, is he a guy that you think teams would trade up for a position other than quarterback at 11 that somebody might want to go get?
Yeah, I do. I mean, there are good enough players to trade up for, I guess there are good enough players. A lot of people are saying this first round is thin, but there are good enough players, and that, it's like 31 flavors of ice cream. One team will really love one player, and if that guy is somewhere where they can move to get him, they'll do it, because they believe in that. Moving down is weird this year because so many teams have multiple first-round picks. I think it's been a long time since we've seen this too. You got teams with 2 and 3 first-rounders, and those are always the ones to watch because they feel like they've got the extra chips in the game to play with and that they can do more things.
So you had Kyle Hamilton third. Why?
I think Hamilton is a awesome prospect. He's one of the biggest safeties you're going to come across. The quibblers are going to say, oh, he ran 4.5 and all that, but in the right scheme with him moving forward a lot of the time, he's just going to make tons of plays. That's it's getting close to being a foundational defensive player these days, a coverage safety. Everybody's playing quarters coverage. Moving forward is the game now for safeties. Can you make plays moving forward? And he's really good at that. Again, draft time is quibble time when you're looking at guys. And, the one thing people wonder is, in a backpedal situation, working backward, how is he going to fare against some of the people he would have to cover? And that's not the strength of his game. So in the right scheme, though, he has big time potential to be a Pro Bowl safety.
You have a few offensive linemen. Evan Neal was your first one, and Ika Mekwanu also, I think, in your top 5.
Oh yeah, I love him.
Yeah, I do too. Could you see one of those top linemen? I guess I would throw Charles Cross in there. Where did you have?
Yeah. Cross is he was my OT3. Yeah. Okay. So I like him too. I mean, those
and I know like
every team's got those 3 guys different too. Yeah, I know a couple teams have Cross as OT1. It's those 3 guys, but they're the top 3.
So could you see one of those guys falling out of the top 10?
Always, because some teams have the philosophy of, I want a guy who touches the ball in the top 10, or affects the passer. Well, so defensively, an edge rusher, a corner. So sometimes, great linemen will get shoved down the board. I mean, look, it's a drastic example, but Creed Humphrey came in as a rookie and was spectacular, and he waited until the second round. He was a walk-in starter, but he's an O-lineman. So some teams are like, we'll just wait.
Well, and I was going to ask you too, because my understanding is some teams really like some of the guys after the first round, that there, you can get like, there's, the tackle from Tulsa.
Really physical guy. I mean, Tyler Smith. He's really super physical. And, the Northern Iowa tackle is raw and he takes too many penalties. But man, when you watch him finish plays off and those types of things, some line coaches are giddy when they watch him play. So
that's why I could see, because that was what I was talking to one team the other day, and they thought maybe he's one of those guys drops because of that reason. Like maybe you want to get somebody else now, knowing that in round 2 or 3, you're going to get a guy who's probably who could be a day one starter.
That's the other thing to sort of watch in the draft is the teams that stick to their board. Like, we spent a year grading these guys. This is how we're going to pick them. They'll take the tackle if he's the best player on the board, no matter what.
Right.
And the teams that are fishing a little more for immediate needs, will often bypass, like they'll have, just as an example, they'll have Evan Neal graded slightly higher than the guy they take, but they need a player now because they didn't do enough in free agency or their cap situation's messed up. So when great players drop, it's because teams are picking for need when they probably shouldn't, but they feel the necessity.
Drake London, you had him at 16. Another guy, like this team likes him. I know that. So
as they should. I have again, I was taught scouting a certain way. Few players rise on the board the draft weekend like long corners with length. And receivers who can win contested balls are always, that's an NFL trait. You can watch game after game of college football, no press coverage, no jams at the line because everybody's fearful, and receivers just run free, and they don't make a tight window catch for 4 weeks. You just watch play after play after play. Players who win contested catches, who are covered aggressively because maybe their team doesn't have a second option, so they get double coverage more often. Those are NFL traits when you watch those. That's why Treylon Burks from Arkansas is such a popular. He and London are the two guys. Their teams didn't have other options, really, not like Ohio State. So they get a lot of, added coverage. So they have to battle for the ball more than other receivers do. And that, to me, that makes you ready to play more quickly. As good as, like here in Denver, as good as Jerry Jeudy is as a route runner, and he's one of the best I've ever seen come out of the draft, the physicality got to him his rookie year. Corners aren't afraid of you anymore. They will get right up in your grill. And if you don't know how to handle that, or you haven't dealt with it because nobody was willing to do it, that makes for a little slower developmental curve.
Chris Olave, another one.
Yep. Smooth. I put it in my nugget. Every scout you talk to, the first word out of their mouth is smooth. And that transitions well because you have the change of pace, as you call it. The baseball would be the change up, but you adjust your speed subtly, and you can create room for yourself, and you're always where you're supposed to be on your routes, which is important to quarterbacks. So I just think, again, the physicality will be he will be challenged early because people will want to see, all right, if I press you, if I line up right up on you on the line of scrimmage, which you probably saw 3 times last year, and that's it. How are you going to handle it? That's always the young receivers, no matter how awesome they are, that will be their first challenge in the NFL, almost from their first 11-on-11 practice. People are going to see, what will you do when I take away the one thing you've had for the past 2, 3, 4 years, which is a free release.
If Jameson Williams didn't have the ACL, where do you think he would be?
Oh, yeah. That's big play. He's got so many plays over 70 yards. I mean, he's just that gets your attention. Again, you're running free a lot of the time, but that's rare playmaking. I think he would be a lot higher, but John, how we thought of ACLs 15 years ago, even is not how we think of them now. I mean, guys come back stronger than ever. I've even seen guys come back faster, which to me it just must be something in the rehab, the focused training on those muscles to come back, that I've actually seen players I've covered come back faster. The example I use here in Denver a lot is, Von Miller tore his ACL in 2012, and he's been nothing but a Pro Bowl player ever since. And he's won a Super Bowl MVP after that. He could have won a second Super Bowl MVP, this year. So yeah, ACLs aren't what they used to be in terms of red flags on the draft board.
Well, it's funny because even in our NFL Nation mock draft, which is on Tuesday night, and I'm not going to say who I picked, but the guy there was available was Jameson Williams. If he's right, he's not available at 11.
No, probably not.
If they think he's right, he's not going to be there at 11.
Well, it's interesting too, though, because for about 5 years in a row, people would ask me, what's the strongest position in this draft? And wide receiver kept coming up, and I finally just come to the conclusion, you know what? Wide receiver is going to be one of the strongest positions in any draft we see moving forward. It's where teams are putting their best athletes. It's where recruiting has gone. It's where all those 7-on-7 camps in high school, the benefits of all of that is we're seeing clusters of wide receivers in every draft. That's the one thing that would push any and all of these wide receivers down the board is everybody's got a top 5 they love and who they believe could come in and play.
Well, it's why I don't understand the salaries for the guys now. Like what teams are willing to pay, knowing that the draft is produced. Now, I know some guys are just special and different. I get that. But if you're, to me, if you're not sure on a guy, I'm going to go back to the draft just because every year you're going to have that. But some guys are different and some guys are special. So you're going to pay special guys differently, no matter the position.
On Outkick 360, we talk football every day of the year because you do too.
This is football! This is football! Welcome to the big leagues!
And we do it with some of the NFL's most experienced insiders, like Outkick's Armando Salguero and Pro Football Hall of Fame contributor John McClain.
There we go! We got him some help, all right! Finally!
I'm Jonathan Hutton. Talk football with me, Chad Withrow, and Paul Kuharski. Follow Outkick 360 on Spotify today.
This episode is brought to you by Perfect Snacks. Looking for a nutritious and delicious snack? Look no further than Perfect Snacks. They have a variety of products made with freshly ground peanut butter, honey, and 20 organic superfoods. It'll be love at first bite. And now for a limited time, they're offering a chance to try their refrigerated protein bars for free. Just sign up for email or text, upload a picture of your receipt, and they'll reimburse you for the cost of one bar. To get a free Perfect Bar today, visit perfectsnacks.com/Spotify.
Stingley, the corner from LSU.
Yep.
I know there are fans here who would love him because you watched the tape a couple years ago and it's awesome. What about the last 2 years? What do you hear about him?
That's a tough evaluation, and people are all across the board on him in terms of that. My struggle with him was he was spectacular in 2019. I mean, spectacular.
Yeah.
Very few freshman corners have I seen play the way he did. But people have not seen that level of play since 2019. I think it's hard to know what's going on in a young guy's head. And there's a lot of people coming at him from a lot of different directions, and everybody has their struggles in life. But when I watched his games from 2020, I kept feeling like it was like he was struggling with, should I be playing or should I have opted out? And I don't know that for a fact. I mean, I asked him a few questions at the combine and those types of things, but it's hard to know what was going on in his heart. Maybe he was just a young guy struggling with adult stuff like we all do.
Right.
Your first job, you struggle with your first job, you struggle with whatever's going on in your life. So, but it is concerning that nobody has seen that level of play since 2019. And then you throw in a Liz Frank injury this past season. That's a serious injury. I pushed him slightly down the board because
You got him at 22.
I've covered so many players who've had a Liz Frank injury and they're okay for a while, and then they have to go back in and change the screws and you lose some playing time. So some of that is my own little bias of players I've covered with that injury and the struggles they've had after it. And at corner, there's no other position on the field where you're torquing your foot at weird angles like a cornerback does. So, it's just, he's a great prospect. He's everything you're looking for in a corner. It's just, we haven't seen the top level of his play in a long time. And that injury is a tough one. And you can look really good running in a straight line like your 40 is going to be great. But it's when you start torquing on that foot, coming out of your back pedal, making the change, all those things that you don't know how that's going to go. And that's where some team doctors will give him the green light and a team will take him very early. And some team doctors will say, I have concerns. And those teams will have him down the board a little bit.
And you had Sauce Gardner number 2, just for point of reference. Just a couple more here, Leggy. What's the difference if Washington doesn't go receiver at 11? What's the difference between the guys you could get there and guys you could get at 47? Is there a big gap? And what is there it doesn't look like there are a lot of big receivers. So if you want a big receiver, you probably have to get it there. So, but what's the gap there, you think?
That's what I was going to say. The size, speed guys will go earlier. They would be able to get super productive receivers with elite speed later, but it's the size speed combo. There will be fewer and fewer of those guys the longer it goes, the longer you wait. That's why a guy to watch, but he's raw. You don't know what you're getting really yet. There's a guy like Isaiah Weston that's a down the board receiver with size and speed, but he played an offense that didn't use him very much. I think he had 6 games this year with 2 or fewer catches. And a guy with that big and that fast should just dominate like constantly at Northern Iowa. And so that you're getting the but receiver size speed guy down the board. That there will be either he had an injury or they didn't throw him the ball very much, or he's a 1 or a 2 route player because they didn't ask him to do anymore. Then it becomes more of a projection and you can find them. But those are the ones you got to get right because you got to be able to predict the future a little bit.
One more position, safety. If they don't go, if Hamlin's not there, I know there's some guys after that point they like. Joaquin Brisker from Penn State, Lewis.
Really good player. Yep.
So do you see those guys being there at 47? And what's the gap between a Hamilton and those guys?
Well, the gap is how many things can you ask them to do? As you move down the board with safeties, the job description gets a little smaller. What did they do great? I am so partial, that there are people split on them, but like I think Baylor's Petrie, Jalen Petrie will play quickly. Down the board, I look for awareness. Does the guy know what's happening around him? I think Seen will be popular among teams just because of that physicality. That guy.
I think these guys like him.
Again, with everybody playing so much zone coverage, you're looking for a sort of different player. You're looking for a guy who runs the alley, who will come down and make plays, not a guy making plays going backward. So if you're a team that's heavy zone, and most teams are now, I mean, I watch games week after week and it's just nothing but quarters all the time in the red zone, and you're looking for downhill safeties in that, nobody's throwing it over your head unless you just messed up, that's the skill set you're looking for. And a lot of guys have that. I just,
you like with Lewis Seen, you mentioned his toughness and his passion, and you're right.
And when he tackles somebody, they stay tackled. As an old scout once told me, he finishes it off. And tackles are, as a stat, are really tough because some schools hand them out like Tic Tacs. They'll have guys with more solo tackles than defensive plays, which is impossible, but you'd see it. I come across it all the time, but Seen as a guy who when you watch the game video, he makes solo tackles in space. He gets people down. And that's a huge thing now, because if you're going to play zone coverages, you got to tackle, and you got to limit, yards after catch and all those things. And there are a bunch of safeties that do that. And, they ran 4-3 and 4-4. And that's exactly what people are looking for now.
Who do you like last position? And actually, I was going to ask you about Christian Watson too, because he's a big play guy, some people like, but also linebacker, because these guys need a linebacker. Don't think they take 111. You had 2 in your top 10, Lloyd and Nakobe Dean.
I'm taking a lot of heat for Dean. I get a lot of texts.
But his size knocks him down, not the play.
Yeah, and this is sort of a little personal debate I have with scouts and GMs all the time. They always tell me this guy can't do this, and I'm like, well, don't ask him to do that then. I just I don't have a beef with that. Linebacker's tough now because everybody's in the nickel,
right?
70% of the time. If you're not in the nickel 70% of the time, you're a rare team these days.
Right. So
the big 240-pound guy, unless he has awesome speed, the Broncos took, Baron Browning in last year's draft. He's a bigger inside linebacker now. He would have been a small guy, 10 years ago, but he ran like crazy at his pro days, tremendously fast. So if you're going to be 235, 238 pounds, 240, you're going to have to be really fast to survive or play with next level awareness. So those are the two things I look for. Is your first step to the ball? Do you understand what you're looking at? And, do you play with awareness? Because again, a Bronco, Josie Jewell ran 4.8 at the combine, which is a death knell for a linebacker, but he plays at about 4.6 because he understands what he's looking at, and he can survive and be a starter. So those are the two things at linebacker you're looking for. I think Dean has that. Some teams will just argue until they're blue in the face. He's a big safety. I see just the kind of size speed guy who can play in a nickel defense and flourish.
Who is the guy after the first round that you'd say, this is the guy that I really like? Is there one guy at that position?
I have a bunch of players I like. Troy Anderson from Montana State has my absolute favorite stat of this draft. That dude rushed for 100 yards and had a sack in the same game. And I just think that's the coolest thing ever. He was an all-conference pick as a quarterback his sophomore year, I believe. And this past year, he was the conference's defensive player of the year. Now, he's not a finished product at linebacker. And some people will say, oh, he's stiff and he's this and that. All I know is wherever they played him, he was an all-conference level player. He played at running back. He played at quarterback. He's played at linebacker. I think that guy is a football player. Somebody will be smart enough to do stuff with, and he'll be great on special teams. So I like him. I like him a ton down the board, but he is a project of sorts. He's only a linebacker for 2 years. He was the team's quarterback before that. So,
yeah, and I think they'll address that spot down the board. But there's like 7 or 8 spots they want to address, and they only have 6 picks right now. So I don't know how they're going to. But you know how it is. Like every year, it's like, well, you want to get this, this, and this. Like you don't have enough picks. You don't have there's like this group of players is really good in this round. Well, you only have 1 pick there, so you better get, or 2 picks rounds 2 through 4. So that's why I think they want to do more. Last thing, you covered Mike Shanahan. He obviously was here. You had some fun exchanges with him over the years. Do you have a favorite Mike Shanahan story?
Well, it's funny because Mike is unbelievably fiery, and it's, I see him now and he couldn't be nicer to me. And I always tease him. That's an unfamiliar feeling for me. But Mike, when you talk to the draft with Mike Shanahan, he had an emotional component to it where he would just love a player, absolutely love him. And he'd love him after like 10 plays. Yeah. But that's how he digested. I've never met or watched game film with anybody who could digest it faster than Mike can. I would stand and watch with him, and he'd go over a play like one time in 10 seconds, and he'd tell me like 14 things, and I'd have to say, "Can go back." I missed that. And so it's not that he digests it so fast. It's like a computer, and it's unbelievable. But in the draft process, that can get you sometimes. And he would later say, "Yeah, I made a mistake on that one." But they drafted Jay Cutler here in the first round, traded up twice in the first round to take him. And I'm not sure I've ever known a team take a quarterback in the first round who they had never spoken to in the draft process. Mike didn't attend his pro day. Mike didn't talk to him at the combine. They didn't interview him. They did not speak. The Denver Broncos did not speak to Jay Cutler, a quarterback.
That's shocking.
Yes. And it was in a quirk of things that the Titans had the number 3 pick that year. Bud Adams, the owner of the team, had essentially told Jeff Fisher and everyone else with the team, "You're taking Vince Young. I don't care what you say, and I'm the owner." And that's who they did take. But they scouted and visited with and had in for the private 30 visits all of the quarterbacks that year. And Mike and Jeff Fisher were very good friends. And Fisher didn't mind talking about Cutler to Mike because they weren't going to take Cutler, even though he played at Vanderbilt right there in Nashville. So that was a big part of the evaluation, was Mike's and Jeff's relationship and discussing Cutler. And they were very public about it. I even did a story about it after it had happened. So that was one of the most unique drafting. I can't imagine a team drafting a quarterback they believe will be their starter for a long time without ever speaking to him.
Leggy, you're the best. I appreciate your time. I took way too much of it, but people need to check out the Jeff Legwold Top 100. Great stuff, and a ton of work that went into it. So that's what people need to know, because it doesn't just, you're not just sitting there putting together a list. You are working on the list the entire year. So
well,
thanks,
someone said I didn't do it well enough. And I stacked about 500. So maybe some year they'll let me run them all. But anyway,
well,
I appreciate it.
But the funny thing is, Leggy, one time I used to do this, like a studs and duds thing type of format. And, and I had one of the scouts here came up to me one time and said, "Oh, I saw your list or whatever." And I go, "What do you think?" He goes, just like half the people here are going to say this and half the people are going to say that. In other words, even in those scouting rooms, you're going to get some people who are probably going to tell the other scout, "You're a fool. How does this guy think that?" Just like the conversations that may be held on social media. It's the debates that get held.
And analytics hasn't changed that at all.
No.
It's only added to the arguments. But that's just the way it is. I enjoy it. I was taught by scouts the right way, and I appreciate them taking the time. I won't keep you. My high school guidance counselor way back told me I should be a welder, and I had told Mike Heimerdinger, longtime coach in the league, who he died of cancer a few years ago. But I had told Dinger that story one time, and I had written something he didn't like, and he walked by me out to practice one day, and he said, "You know what? That guy from your high school was right." And then he just laughed, walked out. So everybody's got an opinion.
There you go. Thanks, Leggy.
Thank you.
This episode is brought to you by Simple Mobile. Tired of being tied down with a wireless contract? Switch to Simple Mobile and stay connected on a powerful nationwide 5G network. Unlimited talk, text, and data starts at $30 a month with no contracts, activation fees, or credit checks. Visit simplemobile.com today. Out with the old, in with the simple. Compatible 5G capable device and SIM required. Actual availability, coverage, and speed may vary. 5G network not available in all areas. 1 month equals 30 days. See terms and conditions at simplemobile.com.
This episode is brought to you by the first ever Toyota Corolla Cross.
All right, everyone, load up.
What are we listening to?
How about hip hop?
Yeah.
Love it.
Nice.
What are we gonna eat?
I'm thinking tacos.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And where exactly are we going?
The beach?
Perfect.
Surf's up.
I'm thinking yes.
Love it.
When everything just feels right, that's the first ever Toyota Corolla Cross. Available with all-wheel drive, expansive cargo space, a stylish exterior, and more. Learn more at toyota.com.
That's it for this episode. A huge thanks to Jeff for joining me, and thank you, as always, for listening. I'll be back on Wednesday with another episode talking with the Washington Post's Nikki Javala as we discuss what Ron Rivera had to say on Monday and some thoughts on what Washington could and should do in the draft. Talk to you next time.